Mala Sudha Kumbha Vibodha Mudra Vidyavirajat Karavari Jata Apara Karunya Sudambura Shimshi Sharadambam Pranatosmi Nityam Shankarupena Marchittam Panki Kritamabudhyaya Kinkarigyassa Samaya Shankaracharyamashaye Prahladavarado Devo Yo Nasamah Paro Harihi Nasumhopashakam Nityam Tam Nasamma Gurum Bhaje Shri Satchidananda Shivabhinavya Nisimha Bharatya Pitan Yatindran Vidyanitin Mantranitin Sadatmanishtan Bhaje Manava Shambhurupan Sadatmatyana Niratam Vishayebhya Paran Mukam Naumi Shastreshu Nishnadam Chandrasekhara Bharatim Vivekinam Mahapragyam Dairyodharakshamanitim Sadabhinava Purvam Tam Vidyatirtha Gurum Bhaje Ajnanam Jannavitirtham Vidyatirtham Vivekinam Sarvesham Shukatam Tirtham Bharati Tirtham Ashraye Vidya Vinaka Sampannam Vitaragam Vivekinam Vande Vedanta Tattvajnam Vidushekara Bharati. Offer this talk at the lotus feet of Jyeshta Mahasannidhanam Jagadguru Srimad Abhinava Vidyatirtha Mahaswamigal Mahasannidhanam Jagadguru Shri Shri Bharati Tirtha Mahaswamigal and Sannidhanam Jagadguru Shri Shri Vidushekara Bharati Mahaswamigal. We offer our humble pranams also to Jnananda Bharati Swamigal, our Manasiga Vedanta Guru. Dear Sishyas, feel so blessed to speak one more time on the occasion of the 48th Aradhana function of Jnananda Bharati Swamigal, who has been my Manasika Vedanta Guru. Like every other year, we thought we should choose one of his texts and speak about it so that the next generation gets induced to read that work and benefit. So this year, we've chosen the book titled as The Great Equations. It's just a 130-page book, pregnant with Upanishadic truths, and explains in such a simple way the most complex, the inexplicable truth of how to attain supreme bliss. Even though it is just 130 pages, it will be an impossible task to contain all of them in one talk. It's not possible. It needs to be discoursed at least in 3 or 4 talks. So the attempt for this Aradhana function is to speak Great Equations Part 1, and the rest of the parts we will try to discourse during this year's Jayanti celebrations of our Swamigal. I once again beseech the blessings of our Swamigal as we now proceed to deliver the lecture under the auspices of the 48th Aradhana function of Jnananda Bharati Swamigal. This text is no exception to Swamigal's usual style of writing and the style of communicating the irreplaceable truth, namely the supreme bliss. To ensure that the reader is kept alive and kept committed to the text, Swamigal has ensured every sentence of the text conveys something important. You can't find one sentence frivolous or a surplusage. If you miss one sentence, you will be missing an important step in knowing the truth. So, a 130 page, completely packed and impregnated with the truths of our great scriptures of Vedanta. Swamigal starts this work again in his own inimitable style by asking or posing the question, what is the goal of human life? And replies in the next sentence, it can't be anything else other than Sat Chit Ananda. Sat meaning unqualified existence, Chit meaning unqualified knowledge, and Ananda meaning unqualified bliss. So, this should be the goal of human life. And says as a second step, remember, one who reaches this step, attains this step, attains this experience, will never return back. And this state would never cease once it is attained. And takes us to the third step by saying, if that is true, all of us as human beings either suffer pain or enjoy pleasures in a cyclic manner in our routine daily life. And therefore Swamigal poses this question, the fact that you are caught between pleasure and pain makes it clear that none of us have experienced what supreme bliss is. None of us have attained that status for it to remain in us or for us to remain in it forever. And therefore deduces the first important proposition of Vedanta. Anyone who is caught between pleasure and pain would have to be born and therefore would have to die. So, something which is born has to die, and something which dies has to be reborn. Which means also there is an existence, there is a disappearance, there is a re-emerging happening cyclically in our lives. So, may it be birth or may it be death, the two sides of birth and the two sides of death are hemmed with non-existence. A state of non-existence, a state of existence, then a state of non-existence, then a state of existence. So, birth and death are hemmed on both sides with non-existence. If that is true, is what we are all experiencing in day in and day out, how do you say and why do you say one who is liberated would stay on course in that state of bliss forever? Because it defies logic, it defies practicality. Is the question posed. How do you say it defies logic? Something which is born has to die. Whereas You are now giving a counter proposition. There is something which will not be born and therefore will not die, and therefore you will stay in a particular state of bliss which is beyond death and birth, or doesn't appear or disappear. How is this possible? Because we see everything dying, everything being born. So it is hemmed in the cycle of existence, in the cycle of becoming, in the cycle of creation. What are you saying? So, Swamigal says, the first thing one has to believe as a matter of faith. This is the point which he conveys as the principal requirement for any student to step into the thought process of Vedanta. Vedanta is all about teaching us an invaluable, imperishable, uncomparable truth of a state of bliss which is free from birth, free from death. It's a state of deathlessness. It's a state of birthlessness. And therefore, at the moment, all of us as aspirants and students of Vedanta should first believe that this cycle of birth and death happens out of ignorance, out of imperfection, which Vedanta identifies it as avidya. Unless we have faith in this conception, when we talk about birth and death, we should always believe this cycle is conceived within the radius or the periphery or the circumference of what is called as avidya or ignorance. And therefore the study of Vedanta is something which is capable of piercing this, tearing this, and showing us a larger truth to us. So avidya is something which we should believe, and as a matter of faith, only then you can progress to conquer avidya. And now, having conceived avidya as the first takeaway which one should believe as a student of Vedanta, Swamigal poses these questions for our sake and for us to get clarity. If you say there is something called avidya which is different from God or bliss or supreme truth, whatever you may call it, then the following questions needs to be asked. Why? When? Where? How? And beyond all this, who is that God? We need to have an answer. Okay, we will believe avidya for the minute, no problem. But belief does not stop us from inquiry, and therefore he poses these 5 questions on our behalf and says, what are the normal answers people usually give when we say, why? Why is this? Why at all this life of birth and death happen? You say there is a supreme state of bliss. Everybody can attain samadhi and everybody can attain that virtual experience, blissful experience and stay there. Then why birth and death? Why avidya? So the question why is, many answer, oh, it's God's will. When somebody poses the question, when did it all start? Answer is, whenever we are born. Where did it start? In this universe, whenever creations happen. How did it happen? It happened because God wills it. It's a superpower. God willed it, so it's happening. Why should it happen? Don't ask questions. Because after all, it is happening. So why the question is why the need to ask this question? Why? Because that's God's will. So these are the answers, possible answers, with its own refinement, with its own angularities. People may be asking, and people may be conveying. But ask, if you plot these 5 questions, why, when, where, how, and all, they all relate to a time period. They all relate to a space, or they all relate to something in terms of reality. All these questions. So, Swamigal recommends, from and out of the Upanishadic truths, as you have faith in avidya, is a requirement, mandatory requirement. The second mandatory requirement for every aspirant to march in this path of spiritual basis, we must be convinced and have the faith avidya is inexplicable. Avidya is devoid of any logical explanation. At the moment, we'll come to the truth a little later. It proceeds on this hypothesis. 1, there is something called avidya. And 2, avidya defies any logical explanation. You can't first explain me avidya for me to get into the school. You will never get into the school. So, for an young aspirant who wants to have a taste of Vedanta, these 2 insurmountable steps should not prevent you from knowing this ocean of knowledge. That's the concern Swamigal conveys by putting these aspects in the first part of the text. This will deter your hope. This will put you a few steps back. Don't feel so. March ahead. Don't ask this. First believe this too. And gives a very simple answer, which of course is pregnant with truth. What are the simple answer? Says, look here. Have this solution in mind. Because it is Advaita which declares this truth. Individual soul, what we call it as Jiva, Jivatma, minus avidya, is not independent or indifferent with Paramatma or Brahman or the Supreme Soul. So, the dividing line between Jivatma and Paramatma is avidya. Avidya is an inexplicable power. Avidya defies logical explanation. Therefore, instead of questioning and getting stuck there, take it this manner, take this bypass route and start inquiring into it so that it provides you the ways and means to get over avidya. If you keep inquiring, no, I need a logical explanation, avidya, you're stuck. You can never march forward. So Swamigal says these 2 conditions are prerequisites for you to march into Vedanta. Only then you will be able to progress. So, believing that all of us here, listening to the talk from the text, Great Equations of Swamigal, considering the fact that we are all devotees of Acharya, so let's believe that avidya is inexplicable and avidya defies logical explanation and move forward to the next step, the big major step into Vedanta. And Swamigal indexes us so beautifully into this process by posing the first question. Whenever we think, speak, or discuss or meditate on God, we presume God is a supreme being. If God is going to be like you and me, then such an experience or entity cannot be God. Therefore, God as a conception has to be a supreme being. So, let's take that hypothesis. God is a supreme being. Let's take that first. Now, apply our own logic, our own definition, our own worldly understanding on this phrase, supreme being. That's the question Swami will poses. Take this phrase and apply your own worldly standards. What do you mean by a supreme being? The fact that it is being shows our forefathers were telling supreme being. Our lineage for generations were saying supreme being. Our subsequent generations and lineages will continue to say it is supreme being. Therefore, God, or if you want to substitute God as supreme being or supreme being as God, God remained a supreme being in the past. God will remain a supreme being in the future. And for the present, we all agree that God is a supreme being. That's why we are discussing this. Therefore, the existence of God as a supreme being has been in the past, is now in the present, and will be also in the future. If it is so, Swamigal says the first principle you have to understand is God, which is a supreme being, is beyond periods and time. God is a feature or a phenomenon beyond time. Now put the next question. If God is beyond time, are we saying, ask the question, can you confine God to a particular space? Worshipping a vigraham or an idol is a completely different story because it starts with dualism for focus. We'll deal it separately. We are now talking about the omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent, the Sarvagyan. So, can you contain, see, this space has God, the rest of them don't have God. Can you say God resides in location A but does not reside in location B? If he resides in location A and does not reside in location B, how will it be a supreme being? So, the second logic which you need to cloth, if you want to understand and experience God is, the supreme being God cannot be contained in a space. So we have found out two things. God is a phenomena which transcends time. God is a phenomena which transcends space. Now comes the third question. If you say God transcends time and space, then God should indeed envelop anything and everything. The reality is It is God which exists everywhere and anywhere, because it is not contained by time, contained by space. Therefore, Swamigal takes us to the third logical proposition. If God is not bound by space and time, can we declare that this whole universe does not have God? Can we assume, like the whole universe does not have God, we the human beings are not God? See, the approach of Advaita is blunt and straight. It is an uncompromising formula, because it chases towards truth without fear. So, the third question that we need to ask is, if something is not contained by time or space, then this universe, which also includes we, the human race, who are qualified to attain this experience of bliss, does God reside in us? Or God is outside the ambit of universe and individual souls? The answer has to be an emphatic no. If God is not confined by time and space, you can't say, if you say God is not part of this universe, then you are confining God to a particular location. If you say no, God is not within us, God is somewhere else, we are somebody else. If you make that distinction, then there is still something where God does not exist as a supreme being, which is untrue. And therefore, Swamigal poses these three questions together. Ask for yourself for the time being. Keep asking questions and keep progressing, because every question will finally get answered. It has been answered because people have experienced, people have attained mukti, people have seen and stayed in bliss. How many of our acharyas' life history we have read, which display what sort of a unique experience each one of them had in attaining the state of bliss. Therefore, these three questions needs to be bundled now together: time, space, and its total enveloping. It is the mud which becomes the pot, but you find the entire mud in the entire pot. Can you say there is one place where you have a pot without the mud? Not possible. So, Supreme Being, this universe is nothing but that Supreme Being. We, the Jivas, are nothing but that Supreme Being, because God is beyond time and space. Fine. When we agree on this point, Swamigal now takes us next to a very, very important step. And before that, puts a few logical questions also to us. When you say Supreme Being, he gives us two examples. You have fire. Fire has the property to generate heat. So, can you separate heat from fire? You cannot. When you say fire, heat goes along with fire. They are inseparable. When they are inseparable, is it possible to now say chilled fire? Will they go together? A cold fire? Will they go together? So, a chilled fire and a cold fire is an impossibility. Likewise, when you say God has to be a supreme being, is it possible to confine God contrary to that supremeness? Contrary to the fact that it is a being, which means it has always, and it will always be there. And give a counter proposition by saying, yeah, God is supreme being, but universe is different from God. Yes, God is a supreme being, but God is different from the human being. This is equivalent to saying chilled fire or cold fire. This is equivalent to saying separating the heat out of fire, a heatless fire. Is it possible? When you see fire, there has to be heat in it. Only then it is fire. Because they are inseparable. So when they are inseparable, how do we ever conceive that we human beings are different from God and this universe is distinct from God? So, by understanding these three at this stage as a takeaway, Swamigal puts the next question on our behalf. Puts two important questions, saying that, hey, what are you saying? You say God is a supreme being. You say God existed in the past, will exist in the present, and will exist in the future. And you say God is not confined by space. If so, why is God not visible? If so, why do we forget God and think of something else? If it is all pervading is your truth, that's what you're coming and telling us. You're trying to convince us. Why should we be convinced with what you say? Because it poses two simple questions. If you say God pervades everybody, I'm not able to see him. Who is he? And only when you talk, I'm following your lecture. Only when I read this book of Swamigal, I understand it. Rest of the time, we are doing so many things. So why do we forget something which is so supreme, so omnipresent, all pervading? And Swamigal now gives a beautiful answer to that. From and out of Vedanta, from our texts. The first thing we must understand, he puts a few illustrations and explains it one after the other. The first illustration which he puts is, let's take a piece of paper. This very book of great equations. It contains 130 pages of printed material, impregnated with truth. So, if you choose to pick this book and start reading the contents, for sure you know that these contents stay in a position because these contents are held by the paper. But when you read the content, do you spend your focus or time in trying to know that there is an underlying paper to it? Simple question. So, it is the underlying paper impregnated with these contents that facilitates you to read. But while reading, your focus is only on the content and not on the paper. When you watch a movie on a cinema screen or on a TV screen, end to end you see only the picture and enjoy the experience, overlooking the fact it is possible only because there is a canvas behind it. Now, can you say, because you are able to read only the content, ignoring and forgetting or not cognizing the fact that it has a paper beneath it, can you say this content, book with content, does not have a surface or a material or a canvas or a base? Of course, you can say, look here, I am able to see the paper and also the content, so I am able to cognize. Vedanta is going to teach us how in reality you can see both God and this universe, as we see paper and the content. This is the exact tattva of Vedanta. There is a rope lying on the road. For one, Vedanta says, for a soul which has attained bliss, it looks like a rope. For a deluded soul in twilight or mild darkness, it may manifest or appear like a snake. See, remember, snake and rope are two different subject matters. They are not the likes. One doesn't emerge out of it. One doesn't get subsumed into the other. But the possibility to perceive a rope as a snake is high. And it is whose mistake? That is why Swamigal preaches all of us based on the Vedantic truth. Avidya defies logical explanation. It's only an experience you have to go through. Mistaking a rope to a snake is distinctly possible. But if you keep asking the question, why this is happening, and don't explore and experience and want to see there are two possibilities. Keep asking the question and don't see the rope. Or go by the guidance given by Vedanta so that it dispels the myth of a snake being superimposed or manifested on a snake and identifies you the snake. Now it is whose mistake to say, no, it's not visible. It's our mistake or their mistake? Whose mistake? When paper is visible, you still see only the content and don't see the paper. Is it paper's mistake? Or it's our mistake? Now the second illustration Swamigal gives is, two people get into an absurd discussion saying, which is of primary importance, the moon or the sun? And one claims, look here, moon is superior than the sun because moon shines in darkness, whereas sun shines in daylight. How absurd this answer could be. The very fact that there is daylight is possible only because sun glows and radiates that the effect of such an illumination across the world. The power of its glow brings daylight and not minus that, as assumed by one of them who is debating to prove whether sun is superior or moon is superior. So, whether it is visible or not, as you see a paper and content, As you see a rope and a snake, as you also see a mud taking the form of a pot, there's a possibility for us to see only the universe and only ourselves and others. And keep contending. God, the omnipresent, God, the supreme bliss, God, the supreme being, is invisible. Overlooking the fact that the underlying substance, the substratum, the background, the material base on which the universe stands. The substratum of every jiva, every human being during its existence. We die, but not the soul. Jivatma doesn't die. So, it's our option for us to view ourselves as a jiva or view this as a body which has a name and identity. Because it has both. How do you say both? Death is an answer. If you don't have a jiva within you, then you should be imperishable forever. Which is not true. This body goes, it decays, it changes phenomena. But there is an unchanging phenomena within it. Like a static paper, it remains the same in spite of the content impregnated over it. So, Swamigal says, it is certainly visible, but we don't wish to see or we don't pursue ourselves to see it. Therefore, don't come to the conclusion it doesn't exist. Now, the second question which he posed was, if you say it exists, then why should we forget? Why should we not be seeing it? What is withholding us? And for which Swamigal again gives very, very simple examples. He puts one illustration. If somebody asks you, how are you? And you say, I'm fine. After that, we don't try to probe or inquire into your health. We leave it there. On the contrary, if you say, no, I'm not fine, I underwent a surgery, a very difficult surgery a few weeks ago, then care starts and questions follow and we start probing what it is. When pigs scream, we don't show any attention. But if a man mimics that screaming, will we not look back and say, who is doing this? When a man, as a lawyer, he chooses to wear only white and white attire every day, then we don't go and ask him, oh, you've worn white and white today also? Very good. We don't compliment him for that. When he comes on an unusual wear, a colored dress on a particular day, don't we go and ask him, hey, come on, what is happening? Why are you doing? What's the reason? Anything special? Is it your birthday? We probe. See, we can keep multiplying a lot of examples on this. But the underlying message which Swamigal seeks to convey to us as part of his preaching is, look here, my child. When something is normal, we don't have the interest to probe. It is not forgetfulness. We don't pay attention. We don't explore. We don't discover. We don't try to inquire and know what it is, because it is normal. Whereas abnormality arouses a lot of curiosity in us. It keeps us engaging. Normality doesn't attract. Abnormality attracts. Take for example any TV channel news, any newspaper, ordinary news we will ignore. Extraordinary sensational news, it will give us a lot of taste and aptitude to probe and find out what it is. So, the logic which Swamigal seeks to drive is this. Look here, my children. Truth is normality. Bliss is the normal state. It is formless, it is colorless, it is genderless. And therefore it remains too normal. Whereas we as human beings are attracted only towards abnormalities. Because we are attracted towards abnormalities, anything abnormal which has form, shape, name, we will go in search of that. It is whose mistake? Can you say therefore God doesn't exist? God is sitting normal. For you to reach that from a state, see what is Vedanta? Drawing you from an abnormal state into a normal state of bliss. Because that's a natural state. That's the inherent state. So, when you move away from your inherent state, because we get distracted, we look at things which are abnormal. We want only the printed content and not the paper which holds it. We want to view only the cinema and not the canvas. Canvas doesn't interest us. Only when you run a film over it, we go there and watch. What is the use of looking at an empty TV screen? So, things which are normal don't attract us. So, he answers both these questions. Is it visible? Yes, it is visible. But we don't see it. We don't want to see it. Are we forgetting it? No, we are not forgetting it. Because we are tempted to drain our energy in looking at abnormal things and therefore do not look at our own natural state. And gives a wonderful example here for all of us to understand. For a goldsmith, when he takes the gold to make an article, his intrinsic attention is on the gold. It is the piece of gold on which he crafts a beautiful ring or a bangle or a necklace. For one who buys it, we as consumers buy these jewels. For us, it is true the metal matters, but more than the metal, it is the design that matters to us, and the price is for the design. It's not just for the intrinsic worth of gold or the intrinsic worth of the craftsmanship. It's for the exquisite appearance it gives to us. So, the price we pay is for its abnormality from its normal state of staying as a gold. Suppose this jewelry is 1,000 years old, 100 years old, 500 years old. Somebody keeps it as a collection of antique properties. It becomes a priceless possession, invaluable possession, not to be equated with money, because the world gives it a different status and recognition. One fine day, this goes to the pawnbroker's shop Will he give attention because it is 1,000 years old for its antique beauty, for its antiquity? Or will he give, this is a jewel which was possessed by so and so of this much value, therefore this is the intrinsic value? Or he will just wait and say, this is worth only this much of gold. Back to square one. Starting from a goldsmith who crafts on the gold into a jewel. Back to the pawnbroker, when you pledge the jewel, he deals it only as a gold, for its intrinsic value of gold. Therefore, Swamigal teaches us, look here, Vedanta teaches you to lead a life of the goldsmith or the pawnbroker. Rather, more preferably the pawnbroker. And not one who either possesses the jewels. Because when you possess, you see only the necklace. In spite of the fact the protruding material is gold, the underlying substance is gold. Or a collector of antique properties who considers this priceless, incomparable, nothing so equivalent to it in the universe. Just be a pawnbroker. And says, how do you do this? So, the first part of great equations ends with this. It says, look here, paper and content, canvas and the cinema screen, television screen and the television programs, understandable. Like that. It is possible for every jiva to look into the gold and its intrinsic worth rather than the protruding jewel as a ring or bangle or necklace. And the whole process of Vedanta is teaching you the technique of how to give up these abnormalities and reach the normal state. And the two initial grounds, the two initial tenets to get going into Vedanta is Abhyasa and Vairagya, says Swami, the third chapter. Abhyasa, which will make you go more and more nearer to the natural state of bliss. Like the pawnbroker intrinsically measuring the net worth, intrinsic worth of the gold. And Vairagya develops, it's an art of developing detachment so that we don't get excited and stay completely deluded on looking at or experiencing these abnormalities in the universe. The experiencer as a human being and subject matters of experience which throws us, which falls on us, which slaps and hits us every minute and every second of our life. For us to get distracted, for us to move away from knowing the truth and says, know the truth, it is only gold, it's only form, it's only mud, pot will break one day and it will restore only as a mud. All these jewels when melted are only mere gold again. So the true state, the normal state is only bliss. Therefore, this is a manifestation and not a creation. Advaita prescribes, validates with a statement that universe and jivas are manifestations, like an imaginary snake manifesting on a rope. So, the whole process is to get away from this delusion, move away from this illusion, so that we see the rope, we see the paper, we see the TV screen, we see the gold, and don't see the abnormalities which get projected as forms and names. And the first two total steps are Abhyasa, and Vairagya. I should thank Shingeri Guru Bandhava channel and our dear beloved Shankar for providing this invaluable opportunity. It's a sheer blessing for a person like me who know nothing about Vedanta a few years back. Mahasannidhanam's paripurna blessings to say you read this text, you read that text, guiding me at every point of time. And I'm stuck always with the works of Dhyananda Bharati Swamigal. Thinks of him, prays to him and starts reading. And it is he who imparts me whatever little I've spoken today. If it is right, the entire credit should be offered at the holy feet of our Swamigal. And if there are any imperfect statements or angularities, that is attributable to my imperfect understanding of what Swamigal has taught me. Please pardon me for that. With these few thoughts, the whole idea is to induce our young minds to go and read this book. Great Equations. I pray to Swamigal that he should bless and provide me with the opportunities to speak the later portions of this book and the total book during this year's Jayanti celebrations in 2023. Wish I be there personally, but do not know. And I'm looking forward to listening to our Rajaram's speech tomorrow. And he's so blessed that he's going to do it at the Adhishtanam of Swamigal. And I request all of you to listen to this young man and keep promoting him as much as possible. He's a big asset, a big future asset for our mat. And with these words, I offer this humble talk at the lotus feet of Jyeshta Mahasannidhanam and Sannidhanam. Sadashiva Samarambam Shankaracharya Madhyama Asmat Acharya Paryantam Vande Guru Parampara.